At the unlikely beginning, Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls and dreamed of prom dresses, Sarah spent her afternoons at her grandfather's ranch, learning to shoot tin cans off fence posts with an old hunting rifle. Her grandfather, a Vietnam War veteran, recognized something special in his granddaughter's steady hands and sharp eyes. "That girl's got the gift," he would tell anyone who would listen. "She can hit a dime from 100 yards without breaking a sweat." But nobody took him seriously. After all, what could a 12-year-old girl possibly know about marksmanship? The local shooting club laughed when Sarah's grandfather brought her to their monthly competitions. The old men with their expensive rifles and decades of experience didn't expect much from the skinny teenager with braided hair and hand-me-down boots. Sarah proved them all wrong. Month after month, she outshot men 3 times her age. Her natural talent was undeniable, but it wasn't just luck or beginner's fortune. Sarah had an almost supernatural ability to read wind patterns, calculate distances, and remain perfectly calm under pressure. While other shooters tensed up during competitions, Sarah's heart rate actually seemed to slow down when she looked through a scope. Despite her consistent victories at local competitions, the broader shooting community remained skeptical. Women simply weren't taken seriously in the world of precision shooting. Many club members assumed her grandfather was somehow helping her cheat, or that she would lose interest once boys and social activities became more important. High school brought new challenges for Sarah. Her peers couldn't understand why she preferred spending weekends at shooting ranges instead of shopping malls. Teachers encouraged her to focus on more appropriate activities for young women, like debate team or student council. Even her own parents worried that her obsession with firearms might hurt her chances of getting into a good college. The doubt and dismissal only fueled Sarah's determination. She studied ballistics textbooks with the same intensity other students devoted to fashion magazines. She practiced breathing techniques and mental focus exercises that she learned from military training manuals. Every skeptical comment and every dismissive laugh became motivation to prove herself. When Sarah announced her intention to join the military after graduation, the reaction was swift and predictably negative. Her guidance counselor suggested nursing or teaching instead. Family friends questioned whether the military was the right place for someone like her. Even some military recruiters seemed surprised when she specifically asked about sniper training programs. The Marine Corps recruiter was the first person in uniform who didn't immediately dismiss Sarah's ambitions. Sergeant Rodriguez had seen enough combat to know that the best snipers weren't always the biggest or strongest soldiers. They were the ones with patience, intelligence, and the ability to make impossible shots when lives depended on it. "The Corps will test everything you think you know about yourself," Rodriguez warned Sarah during their first meeting. "Boot camp breaks down tough guys twice your size. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of challenge?" Sarah's response was simple and direct. "I've been preparing for this my whole life. I'm not looking for an easy path. I want to serve my country, and I want to do it where I can make the biggest difference." Basic training at Parris Island was exactly as brutal as advertised. Sarah's drill instructors seemed particularly determined to break the young woman who had the audacity to request sniper school. They gave her extra physical training, assigned her the heaviest equipment, and constantly questioned her commitment and capability. But Sarah had learned to thrive under pressure. Every push-up in the South Carolina heat, every mile marched with a heavy pack, every sleepless night during field exercises only strengthened her resolve. She watched as bigger, stronger recruits dropped out or got recycled to later training companies, but Sarah never wavered. Her marksmanship scores during basic training caught everyone's attention. While most recruits struggled to hit targets at 300 meters, Sarah was consistently placing shots in the bullseye at 500 meters and beyond. Her instructors began to take notice, though many still doubted whether a woman could handle the psychological demands of sniper training. The selection process for sniper school was designed to eliminate all but the most exceptional candidates. Physical fitness requirements were demanding, but the mental challenges were even more difficult. Candidates had to demonstrate not just shooting ability, but also advanced mathematics skills, tactical thinking, and the emotional stability to take a human life when necessary. Sarah excelled in every phase of the selection process. Her shooting scores were among the highest in the program's history, but what really impressed the instructors was her analytical approach to problem solving. She could calculate complex ballistics equations in her head while lying motionless in uncomfortable positions for hours at a time. Even as Sarah proved herself academically and technically, some instructors remained skeptical about her psychological readiness for combat. They questioned whether she truly understood the weight of taking a human life or whether she would freeze up in a real combat situation. These doubts followed her throughout sniper school, creating an additional burden that her male classmates didn't have to carry. The training scenarios became increasingly realistic and stressful. Students were tested on their ability to make precision shots while under simulated enemy fire, while exhausted from days without sleep, and while dealing with equipment failures and communication breakdowns. Sarah not only survived these tests, but often performed better than her male counterparts. One particular exercise stood out to everyone who witnessed it. Students were required to engage multiple targets at varying distances while being harassed by instructors using blank ammunition and smoke grenades. Most students became flustered and missed several shots. Sarah methodically worked through each target, adjusting for wind and distance with mechanical precision, and achieved perfect scores despite the chaos around her. When graduation day arrived, Sarah stood among only 12 students who had successfully completed the grueling program out of the original class of 48. She had earned her sniper qualification, but she knew that the real test was yet to come. Combat would be different from any training exercise, and she would have to prove herself all over again to the Marines, who would depend on her skills to keep them alive. Her first deployment assignment came with mixed reactions from her new unit. Some Marines were excited to have such a highly qualified sniper supporting their operations. Others openly questioned whether a woman could be trusted in such a critical role. The unit's commanding officer, Major Thompson, was pragmatic about the situation. "I don't care if our sniper is a man, woman, or trained monkey," Thompson told his officers. "What I care about is whether they can put rounds on target when it matters. Mitchell's training record suggests she can do exactly that." Still, Sarah could feel the weight of skepticism from many of her new teammates. She understood that one mistake, one missed shot, or one moment of hesitation could confirm every doubt that had ever been expressed about women in combat roles. The pressure was enormous, but it was pressure she had been preparing to handle her entire life. As her unit prepared for deployment to Afghanistan, Sarah spent every available moment studying intelligence reports, terrain maps, and weather patterns. She knew that her first combat missions would be crucial for establishing credibility with her fellow Marines. There would be no room for error and no second chances to make a first impression. The weapons sergeant who helped her zero her rifle before deployment was impressed by her technical knowledge and attention to detail. "Most snipers are good shots," he told her, "but you understand the science behind the shot better than anyone I've worked with. That's going to make all the difference when things get complicated out there." Sarah's final training exercise before deployment was a 1-200-meter shot on a moving target in challenging wind conditions. She had to calculate not just the trajectory of her bullet, but also predict where the target would be when the bullet arrived nearly 2 seconds later. She made the shot on her first attempt, silencing any remaining doubts among the training staff. But Sarah knew that all the training in the world couldn't fully prepare her for the reality of combat. She would soon face situations where the targets would be shooting back, where innocent civilians might be nearby, and where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death for her fellow Marines. As her transport plane lifted off for Afghanistan, Sarah looked out the window at the American coastline disappearing below. She thought about her grandfather, who had planted the first seeds of her shooting ability so many years ago. She thought about all the people who had doubted her capabilities and all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this point. Most importantly, she thought about the Marines counting on her to bring them home safely. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah was ready to prove that their trust in her was well placed. She had spent her entire life preparing for this moment, and she was determined not to let anyone down. Proving ground. The Afghanistan terrain was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, creating complex wind patterns that could push a bullet several feet off target at long range. The altitude affected bullet trajectory in ways that required constant recalculation. Even experienced snipers struggled with the challenging conditions, but Sarah adapted quickly. Her first combat mission came just 3 weeks after arriving in country. Intelligence reports indicated that a Taliban commander was planning to attack a convoy of humanitarian aid trucks traveling through a narrow mountain pass. Sarah's unit was tasked with providing overwatch from a ridge overlooking the road. The mission briefing was tense. Major Thompson explained that the convoy contained medical supplies desperately needed by civilian populations in remote villages. If the attack succeeded, not only would Marines die, but thousands of innocent people would suffer without access to basic medical care. Sarah's shooting position was on a rocky outcrop nearly 800 meters from the road where the ambush was expected to occur. She spent hours before dawn studying the terrain through her scope, noting wind patterns, and identifying potential target areas. Her spotter, Corporal Martinez, was initially skeptical about working with a female sniper, but had heard about her exceptional training scores. "You really think you can make shots at this distance in these conditions?" Martinez asked as they settled into position before sunrise. Sarah adjusted her scope and checked her range cards one final time. "Distance isn't the challenge," she replied calmly. "The challenge is making the right decision about when to shoot." The convoy appeared on schedule, a line of armored vehicles moving slowly through the dangerous pass. Sarah tracked their progress through her scope, while Martinez monitored radio communications and watched for signs of enemy movement. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then Martinez spotted muzzle flashes from a cave approximately 750 meters away. "Contact left. Cave mouth at grid reference 247, Martinez called out, his voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. Sarah smoothly transitioned her rifle toward the target area. Through her scope, she could see the distinctive outline of an RPG launcher being positioned at the mouth of the cave. The Taliban fighter was preparing to fire on the lead vehicle in the convoy, which contained the mission commander and several Marines. The wind had picked up significantly since dawn, and Sarah had to account for a crosswind that would push her bullet several inches off course at this distance. She also had to consider the downward angle of her shot and the precise timing needed to hit a target that might move at any moment. Range 745 meters, wind left to right at approximately 8 miles per hour. Target is stationary but may move, Sarah reported to Martinez while making minute adjustments to her scope. Convoy is 30 seconds from the kill zone, Martinez responded. You are cleared to engage. Sarah controlled her breathing and let her heart rate slow down, just as she had trained to do thousands of times before. The Taliban fighter was clearly visible through her scope, his finger on the trigger of the RPG launcher. In a few seconds, he would fire on the convoy, potentially killing or wounding several Marines. The shot had to be perfect. At this distance, even a small error would mean a complete miss, giving the enemy fighter time to fire his weapon and possibly escape into the cave system. Sarah made one final wind adjustment and slowly squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew for nearly 1 second before striking the target center mass. The Taliban fighter dropped immediately, and the RPG launcher fell harmlessly into the rocks below the cave mouth. The convoy continued through the pass without incident, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. "Confirmed hit. Target is down," Martinez reported over the radio, his voice filled with amazement and respect. He had witnessed hundreds of combat engagements, but he had never seen a more technically perfect shot under pressure. Word of Sarah's successful first engagement spread quickly throughout the base. Marines who had previously questioned her capabilities began to view her differently. She had proven herself under fire, saving lives and completing the mission exactly as her training had prepared her to do. But Sarah knew that one successful shot, impressive as it might be, wasn't enough to completely overcome the skepticism she faced. She would need to demonstrate consistent performance over many missions before earning the full trust and respect of her fellow Marines. Her second major engagement came during a complex operation to clear a Taliban stronghold from a strategically important village. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch for Marine infantry units as they advanced through narrow streets and buildings where enemy fighters might be hiding. The mission began before dawn, with Sarah and Martinez moving into position on a hilltop overlooking the village. Intelligence reports suggested that significant numbers of Taliban fighters had fortified several buildings and were prepared to fight a prolonged battle. As the Marine infantry units began their advance, Sarah scanned the village systematically through her scope, looking for signs of enemy activity. The buildings were old and made of thick stone that could hide muzzle flashes and make target identification extremely difficult. 20 minutes into the operation, Sarah spotted movement in a second-story window of a building approximately 600 meters away. Through her scope, she could see the barrel of an enemy sniper rifle being positioned to fire on the advancing Marines. "Sniper threat, second-floor window. Building at grid reference 315, Sarah reported immediately. The enemy sniper was well-trained and disciplined. He remained motionless for several minutes, waiting for the perfect opportunity to engage the Marines below. Sarah had to remain equally patient, watching for the moment when the enemy would expose enough of himself to present a clear target. Martinez monitored the radio traffic from the infantry units, providing Sarah with constant updates on their positions and movement. "First squad is approaching the target building. They don't know about the sniper threat." Sarah knew she had only moments to act. If the enemy sniper fired first, at least one Marine would be killed or seriously wounded. She watched through her scope as the enemy fighter made small adjustments to his position, preparing for his shot. When the enemy sniper finally exposed his head and shoulders to aim at the Marines below, Sarah was ready. Her crosshairs were perfectly aligned, and she had already accounted for wind and distance. She fired without hesitation. The enemy sniper collapsed immediately, his rifle falling from the window. The Marine infantry units continued their advance without ever knowing how close they had come to walking into a deadly ambush. "Outstanding shot," Martinez said quietly. "You probably just saved 3 or 4 lives down there." The operation continued for several more hours, with Sarah providing overwatch and making 2 additional long-range shots to eliminate enemy fighters who threatened the advancing Marines. Each shot was technically challenging, requiring precise calculations and perfect execution under combat stress. By the end of the mission, Sarah had eliminated 4 enemy targets at ranges between 500 and 800 meters, all while supporting a complex infantry operation in challenging terrain. Her performance was flawless, and even the most skeptical Marines began to acknowledge her exceptional abilities. Major Thompson's after-action report praised Sarah's performance in glowing terms. Corporal Mitchell demonstrated exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness throughout the operation. Her precision shooting was directly responsible for preventing multiple Marine casualties and ensuring mission success. But Sarah's reputation truly solidified during her third month in Afghanistan, when her unit was called upon to support a joint operation with British Special Forces. The mission involved rescuing a captured intelligence officer who was being held in a remote Taliban compound. The compound was located in a valley surrounded by steep hills, making direct assault extremely dangerous. The rescue plan called for Special Forces teams to infiltrate the compound while snipers provided overwatch from surrounding ridgelines. Sarah was assigned a position on a hill nearly 200 meters from the target compound. At this extreme distance, even minor environmental factors could cause significant bullet drift. Temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure all had to be calculated along with wind speed and direction. The British Special Forces commander was initially surprised to learn that an American woman would be providing sniper support for such a critical mission. However, he had read Sarah's file and understood that her technical qualifications were impressive. "The success of this mission depends entirely on precision shooting," the British officer explained during the briefing. "We cannot afford any missed shots or hesitation. Lives are at stake." Sarah spent the entire night before the mission studying satellite photographs of the target area and calculating ballistic data for various engagement scenarios. She memorized every building, every wall, and every potential hiding spot within the compound. The rescue operation began just before dawn, with Sarah and Martinez moving into their overwatch position. Through her high-powered scope, Sarah could clearly see the compound buildings and several enemy guards moving around the perimeter. As the Special Forces teams began their infiltration, Sarah tracked multiple potential threats through her scope. Enemy fighters were positioned in guard towers and on rooftops, all heavily armed and alert for any signs of attack. The critical moment came when one of the infiltrating teams was spotted by an enemy sentry. The guard was reaching for his radio to alert the entire compound when Sarah acquired him in her scope. The range was 156 meters, with a moderate crosswind and significant downward angle. Sarah had less than 3 seconds to make the shot before the sentry could raise the alarm and compromise the entire rescue mission. She quickly calculated the ballistic solution in her head, adjusted her point of aim, and fired. The bullet struck the enemy sentry in the chest, dropping him silently before he could send a warning. The Special Forces teams continued their infiltration undetected, eventually reaching the building where the captured officer was being held. Throughout the 40-minute rescue operation, Sarah made 5 additional precision shots, eliminating enemy threats at ranges between 800 and 200 meters. Each shot was crucial for protecting the infiltrating teams and ensuring the mission's success. The rescued intelligence officer was safely extracted without a single friendly casualty. The British Special Forces commander later told Major Thompson that he had never witnessed more impressive long-range shooting under combat conditions. "Your sniper saved our mission and probably saved several lives," the British officer said. "Gender is completely irrelevant when someone can shoot like that under pressure." By her 6th month in Afghanistan, Sarah had participated in over 30 combat missions and had successfully engaged enemy targets at ranges up to 1,400 meters. Her reputation as an exceptional sniper had spread throughout the military community, earning respect from Special Forces units, infantry commanders, and fellow snipers. But Sarah knew that her most challenging test was still ahead. Intelligence reports were indicating increased enemy activity in a region where American forces had limited presence. A mission was being planned that would require the longest and most difficult shots of her career, under conditions that would test every skill she had developed over years of training and combat experience. The impossible shot. Intelligence had been monitoring suspicious activity in the remote Kunar province for weeks. Satellite imagery showed large gatherings of vehicles and personnel in an area that should have been nearly empty. Communication intercepts suggested something significant was being planned, but the exact nature of the threat remained unclear. Sarah's unit received orders to deploy to a forward operating base near the Pakistani border to investigate and potentially disrupt whatever operation the enemy was planning. The assignment came with unusual secrecy and urgency that indicated its critical importance. Major Thompson briefed the team on their new mission during the helicopter flight to the remote base. Intelligence believes we're looking at a major terrorist operation, possibly involving chemical weapons or a large-scale attack on civilian targets. Our job is to get close enough to figure out what's happening and stop it if necessary. The forward base was little more than a collection of temporary shelters and defensive positions carved into a mountainside. The surrounding terrain was some of the most challenging Sarah had encountered, with peaks reaching over 4,000 meters and valleys that seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Sarah's first task was to establish observation posts that could monitor the suspected enemy activity area from multiple angles. The main target zone was in a valley nearly 6,500 meters away, requiring her to set up positions on some of the highest accessible peaks in the region. Working with Martinez and 2 additional spotters, Sarah spent 3 days climbing to potential shooting positions and testing various sight lines and ranges. The extreme altitude affected everything from bullet trajectory to her own physical performance, requiring constant recalculation of ballistic data. On the 4th day of their deployment, drone surveillance finally provided clear intelligence about the enemy operation. High-resolution imagery showed a large terrorist training camp with approximately 200 fighters and significant weapons stockpiles. More concerning was evidence of chemical weapon components being assembled in a central facility. "This isn't just a training camp," the intelligence officer explained during the mission briefing. "They're preparing chemical weapons for a major attack, likely targeting civilian populations in Afghanistan or Pakistan. We have to stop them before they can deploy whatever they're building." The problem was the camp's location. It was situated in a valley surrounded by steep mountains, with only one access route that was heavily defended. A direct assault would be extremely costly and might give the terrorists time to deploy their chemical weapons before being stopped. The mission planners developed an alternative approach. A small special forces team would infiltrate the valley during darkness to plant explosives in the chemical weapons facility. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch from an extreme distance, eliminating any threats that might compromise the infiltration team. The shooting position they selected was on a peak 6,847 meters from the target camp. At this distance, Sarah would be attempting shots that were beyond the normal effective range of her rifle system. The bullets would take over 6 seconds to reach their targets, requiring unprecedented precision in calculating trajectory and timing. Sarah spent 2 full days preparing for the mission. She studied weather patterns, calculated ballistic data for various atmospheric conditions, and rehearsed her shooting positions until every movement was automatic. She also worked closely with meteorologists to understand how wind patterns changed throughout the day at different altitudes. The mathematical complexity of shots at this extreme range was staggering. Sarah had to account for the Earth's rotation, which would cause bullets to drift several inches during their 6-second flight time. Temperature and humidity variations between her position and the target would affect bullet velocity and trajectory in ways that required constant adjustment. Martinez, who had worked with some of the military's best snipers, was amazed by the technical challenges Sarah was preparing to overcome. "I've never even heard of anyone attempting shots at this distance in combat," he told her. "Are you sure this is possible?" Sarah finished her ballistic calculations and checked her range cards one final time. "The physics works," she replied. "Whether I can execute it perfectly under pressure is what we're about to find out." The mission began at 0200 hours, with Sarah and her team moving into their overwatch position under cover of darkness. The climb to their shooting position took nearly 3 hours through treacherous mountain terrain that required ropes and climbing equipment. By dawn, Sarah was in position with a clear view of the enemy camp through her high-powered scope. She could see guards moving around the perimeter, vehicles being loaded with equipment, and most importantly, the chemical weapons facility where several figures in protective suits were working with dangerous materials. The Special Forces infiltration team began their approach to the valley just after sunrise, using terrain features and careful timing to avoid enemy observation posts. Sarah tracked their progress while simultaneously monitoring activity in the enemy camp for potential threats. At 0847 hours, the mission encountered its first crisis. One of the infiltrating Special Forces operators accidentally triggered a small rock slide that alerted an enemy patrol. Through her scope, Sarah could see 5 Taliban fighters moving toward the Special Forces position, armed with automatic weapons and radio equipment. "Contact! 5 enemy personnel approaching infiltration team from the north," Sarah reported over the radio. "Range to targets is 6,723 meters." The Special Forces team leader's response was immediate and urgent. "We cannot engage without compromising the entire mission. Can you eliminate the threats from your position?" Sarah quickly calculated the ballistic solution for engaging targets at this extreme range. Wind conditions were moderate but variable, with different speeds and directions at various altitudes between her position and the target. The downward angle was severe, requiring significant adjustment to her normal calculations. "Stand by for engagement," Sarah replied, settling into her shooting position and making precise adjustments to her scope. The first target was a Taliban fighter who had stopped to scan the hillside with binoculars, apparently searching for signs of the infiltrating team. Sarah placed her crosshairs carefully, accounting for the bullet's long flight time and the target's potential movement. The shot required absolute perfection. At nearly 6,800 meters, even a tiny error in calculation or execution would result in a complete miss. Sarah controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow to its combat rhythm, and slowly squeezed the trigger. 6.3 seconds later, the Taliban fighter collapsed. The other enemy fighters immediately took cover, confused about where the shot had originated from. The extreme distance made the sound of Sarah's rifle nearly inaudible at the target location. "Confirmed hit! 1 target down," Martinez reported, his voice filled with amazement. "I can't believe that shot actually connected." Sarah was already transitioning to her second target, a fighter who was attempting to use his radio to call for reinforcements. This shot was even more challenging because the target was partially concealed behind rocks and moving intermittently. She waited patiently for the optimal moment when the target would expose enough of himself to present a clear shot. When the Taliban fighter finally raised his head to look around the rocks, Sarah was ready with perfect sight alignment and ballistic solution. Her second shot was equally successful, eliminating the radio operator before he could alert the main camp about the infiltrating Special Forces team. The remaining 3 Taliban fighters were now completely confused and disoriented, unable to determine where the shots were coming from. But Sarah's most challenging shot was yet to come. Intelligence intercepted radio communications indicating that the chemical weapons facility was preparing to begin loading their deadly payload onto vehicles for transport. If the weapons left the camp, tracking and stopping them would become nearly impossible. The mission plan called for the Special Forces team to reach the facility and plant explosives, but they were still nearly an hour away from their target. Sarah needed to create a diversion that would delay the loading operation without revealing the presence of the infiltrating team. Through her scope, she could see a fuel truck parked near the chemical weapons facility. A precision shot into the truck's fuel tank would create a spectacular explosion that would disrupt the entire camp's activities and force them to focus on firefighting rather than weapons loading. The challenge was that the fuel tank was a relatively small target at nearly 7,000 meters distance, and it was positioned between other vehicles that could block Sarah's shot depending on the exact angle. She would need to hit a target approximately the size of a large suitcase from a distance of nearly 4.5 miles. Sarah studied the target area carefully through her scope, noting the positions of other vehicles and personnel. She calculated wind conditions, atmospheric pressure, and trajectory with mathematical precision that amazed even her experienced spotter. "This shot is at the absolute limit of what's physically possible," Martinez warned her. "Even if everything goes perfectly, there's still a significant chance of missing." Sarah made final adjustments to her scope and settled into her shooting position. "The Special Forces team is counting on us to buy them time," she replied. "I'm taking the shot." The ballistic calculation for this shot was the most complex Sarah had ever attempted. The bullet would travel for over 6 seconds, during which Earth's rotation would cause lateral drift, atmospheric conditions would affect velocity, and even minute variations in her shooting position could cause significant point-of-impact changes. She controlled her breathing and let her heart rate settle to its slowest rhythm. Through her scope, the fuel truck appeared tiny and distant, surrounded by other vehicles and personnel who had no idea they were being watched from nearly 7 kilometers away. Sarah slowly squeezed the trigger, applying steady pressure until the rifle fired with perfect surprise. She maintained her sight picture and followed through with her shooting fundamentals, even though the target would not be visible for several more seconds. The bullet arced high above the intervening mountains, following a ballistic trajectory that would have been impossible to calculate without advanced mathematical skills and years of practical experience. For 6.7 seconds, Sarah and Martinez watched through their scopes, waiting to see if the most difficult shot of her career would find its mark. The explosion was visible even at their extreme distance. The fuel truck erupted in a massive fireball that immediately spread to nearby vehicles and structures. The entire enemy camp was thrown into chaos as fighters ran to battle the rapidly spreading flames. "Direct hit!" Martinez shouted, unable to contain his excitement. "The fuel truck is completely destroyed, and the fire is spreading to other vehicles." The explosion had achieved exactly what Sarah intended. The chemical weapons loading operation was halted as all available personnel fought to prevent the fire from reaching the weapons facility. The Special Forces infiltration team used the confusion to advance undetected to their target. 20 minutes later, the Special Forces team successfully planted their explosives and began their extraction. Sarah provided overwatch during their withdrawal, making 2 additional long-range shots to eliminate enemy fighters who threatened the retreating team. The chemical weapons facility was destroyed in a controlled explosion that eliminated the terrorist threat without releasing dangerous chemicals into the atmosphere. Intelligence later confirmed that the weapons had been intended for attacks on civilian populations in major Afghan cities. Sarah's shooting performance during the mission was unprecedented in military history. She had successfully engaged targets at ranges exceeding 6,800 meters, making shots that military experts had considered theoretically possible, but practically impossible to execute in combat conditions. The mission's success prevented a catastrophic terrorist attack that could have killed thousands of innocent people. Sarah's precision shooting had been the critical factor that allowed the Special Forces team to complete their mission without casualties or compromise. Major Thompson's after-action report described Sarah's performance as extraordinary marksmanship that prevented a significant humanitarian disaster. Military shooting experts who reviewed the ballistic data called her achievements the most impressive long-range shooting ever documented in combat. When Sarah returned to the United States after completing her deployment, she was quietly awarded the Bronze Star for her exceptional service in Afghanistan. The specific details of her longest shots remained classified, but her reputation as one of the military's most capable snipers was established beyond question. Years later, when military historians wrote about the evolution of precision shooting, they would point to Sarah Mitchell as the sniper who proved that technical excellence, mathematical precision, and mental discipline were more important than size, strength, or gender. Her record-breaking shots had saved countless lives and prevented a terrorist catastrophe that could have changed the course of the war. Sarah never sought public recognition for her achievements. She understood that her success came from years of dedicated training, exceptional mathematical skills, and the support of teammates who trusted her completely. Most importantly, she had proven that determination and precision could overcome any obstacle, including the skepticism of those who once doubted that a woman could excel in one of the military's most demanding roles.